Robert Sterling had spent 40 years building things that were meant to last forever. Hotels in Miami, glass towers in Dallas, luxury resorts hidden in the mountains of Colorado. People called him a genius with structure and design. But none of those buildings prepared him for the night he discovered his own family had collapsed from the inside. That Christmas Eve, snow hammered the roads leading into Aspen. Robert's black Range Rover pushed through the storm, while the windshield wipers fought to keep the glass clear. His hands stayed tight on the steering wheel the entire drive. Something about Diane's voice during their phone call earlier that evening had unsettled him deeply. His wife had sounded distant, small, almost frightened. "Rob, you don't need to come," she had whispered softly over the phone. "Everything's fine here." But Robert Sterling knew his wife too well. After 34 years of marriage, he could hear pain hiding inside silence. So he drove through the storm. The Aspen mansion appeared through the snow like a glowing castle. Warm golden light spilled from massive windows. Smoke drifted from the giant stone chimney. Expensive cars lined the circular driveway. Inside, people were celebrating Christmas with champagne, music, and laughter. Then Robert saw Diane. His breath stopped instantly. She sat outside on the freezing stone steps near the front porch, curled against the wall like a lost child. Snowflakes clung to her gray hair. Her cream-colored sweater was soaked from the storm. Her arms wrapped tightly around herself as she trembled violently in the cold. Robert stared through the windshield in disbelief. Inside the house, only a few feet away, his son Mark and daughter-in-law Chloe stood beside the fireplace laughing, with guests. Nobody looked outside. Nobody noticed Diane freezing alone. Robert slowly stepped out of the SUV. The freezing wind hit his face immediately, but he barely felt it. Something much colder had already entered his chest. Diane looked up when she heard the car door slam shut. Fear filled her eyes, not relief. Fear. Robert walked toward her carefully. "Diane," he whispered. Her lips trembled. "Rob." He knelt beside her and touched her cheek. Her skin felt like ice. "What happened?" Immediately, Diane tried defending them. "I spilled wine," she said weakly. "Mark said I needed air to calm down." Robert looked through the giant living room windows again. Mark stood near the fireplace holding a glass of champagne while Chloe laughed beside him. Chloe's father, attorney Charles Vance, stood nearby enjoying whiskey with several wealthy guests. Warmth, luxury, comfort. And outside their own mother froze in the snow. Robert helped Diane stand carefully. Her body felt alarmingly light, fragile beneath his hands. Then he pushed open the front door and walked inside with her. The entire room went silent. Music continued softly in the background, but every conversation stopped the moment guests saw Robert carrying Diane through the door. Mark approached first, tall, confident, perfectly dressed, but there was no guilt in his face, only irritation. "Dad," Mark said calmly, "we have guests." Robert stared at his son for several long seconds. Not once did Mark ask if Diane was all right. Not once. Robert guided Diane toward the leather sofa beside the massive fireplace and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Her body continued shaking uncontrollably. Then he turned toward Mark. "You left your mother outside in the snow." Before Mark could answer, Chloe stepped forward smoothly. Chloe Sterling was beautiful in the kind of way that felt almost artificial. Perfect makeup, perfect smile, perfect voice. But behind her calm expression lived something cold. "Robert," she said gently, "Diane has been emotionally unstable lately. We were simply trying to avoid unnecessary stress for her." Robert repeated the words slowly. "Stress." His voice echoed through the giant living room. "You call leaving your mother outside during a snowstorm stress management?" Mark crossed his arms impatiently. "You're overreacting." Those 3 words changed everything, because cruelty becomes terrifying the moment people believe it is reasonable. Robert looked around the room slowly. Wealthy guests avoided eye contact. Nobody defended Diane. Nobody challenged Mark or Chloe. Fear of power makes people silent. Attorney Charles Vance calmly watched everything beside the fireplace without speaking a single word. That silence disturbed Robert the most. It felt planned, controlled. Like everyone understood something he didn't. Robert checked his watch slowly. 10:35 p.m. Then he looked directly at Mark. "Pack your mother's things," he said quietly. "We're leaving." For the first time all night, Mark looked nervous. Chloe immediately stepped forward again. "Robert, sudden changes could negatively affect Diane's condition." Condition? Interesting word. Robert moved closer until Chloe's confident smile began cracking. "If my wife spends another minute in this house," Robert said coldly, "you'll learn exactly how dangerous I can become." The room fell silent again. Heavy silence. Mark finally sighed in frustration. "You gave me authority here, Dad. You trusted me." Robert stared directly into his son's eyes. "And you mistook trust for ownership." Mark disappeared upstairs angrily, while Chloe remained beside her father. Robert sat next to Diane and gently held her trembling hands near the warmth of the fire. 10 minutes later, Mark returned carrying Diane's old leather bag. He dropped it onto the hardwood floor carelessly. Diane flinched. Robert noticed immediately. And once a husband sees fear in his wife, he never forgets it. "You satisfied now?" Mark asked bitterly. Robert stood slowly. "No," he answered quietly. "I'm awake now." Without another word, Robert helped Diane toward the door and walked her out of the mansion, leaving behind stunned silence and frightened whispers. The drive to Denver passed quietly. Snow hammered the roads while Diane sat wrapped in blankets beside him. Every few minutes she apologized. "I ruined Christmas." Each apology broke Robert a little more. Victims always blame themselves first. After nearly an hour of silence, Robert finally spoke. "How long has this been happening?" Diane stared out the window. "I don't know." That answer terrified him more than anything else, because manipulation works best when victims stop trusting their own memory. "Mark said I've been confused lately," Diane whispered softly. Robert tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Have you?" She hesitated. "Sometimes I don't know anymore." Those words shattered something inside him. The Denver penthouse felt cold despite the expensive furniture and giant city windows. Robert settled Diane onto the couch and brought her tea while snow covered the skyline outside. Then he noticed something strange. "Where's your phone?" Diane froze immediately. "Mark has it." Robert turned slowly toward her. "What? Do you mean he has it?" "He said people were trying to scam me online. He took control of my accounts for protection." Protection. Another word manipulators love. "Can you contact anyone?" She shook her head weakly. "No." Then suddenly, Diane remembered something. The old iPad. Robert retrieved the device from her bag. It was scratched, outdated, almost forgotten. But inside that old iPad lived the truth that would destroy an empire. When Robert powered it on, he found a voice recording saved 3 days earlier under the label Living Room Rug Ideas. He pressed play. At first there was only static. Then a door opened. Chloe's voice filled the room. Cold, sharp, merciless. "We need to move faster." Robert's body went completely still. Then Mark answered calmly. "She's becoming difficult." Diane covered her mouth with trembling hands. Chloe spoke again. "Did you adjust the dosage?" Robert felt ice spread through his chest. "She's more confused now," Mark replied. 3 more days, and we'll have the final signature." "What about Robert?" Chloe whispered. Mark laughed softly. "Dad's too old to fight back." The recording ended. Silence swallowed the penthouse completely. Diane began crying. Quietly. "They kept telling me I was confused," she whispered. "I thought maybe they were helping me." Robert moved beside her immediately and held her tightly. but something inside him had changed forever. This was no longer family conflict. This was calculated betrayal, and someone had taught his son exactly how to destroy people without ever raising a hand. Robert Sterling did not sleep that night. While Diane finally rested on the couch beneath a thick wool blanket, he stood near the giant penthouse windows, watching snow fall across Denver. The city lights glowed through the storm below, cold and distant, while one terrible question repeated itself inside his mind again and again. How long? How long had his son been manipulating Diane while he traveled around the world building deals and expanding Sterling Holdings? The guilt sat heavy in his chest. Robert had spent decades believing success meant providing luxury and security for his family. Every business trip, every missed holiday, every sleepless night had been justified by one thought: I'm doing this for them. But standing there alone in the dark penthouse, he realized something painful. Money protects people from strangers. It does not protect them from betrayal inside their own home. At nearly 3 a.m, Robert quietly walked toward Diane to check on her. Even in sleep, she looked tense. Her hands twitched nervously beneath the blanket, as if her body still expected punishment. That sight filled him with a kind of rage he had never known before. Not explosive rage, cold rage, the dangerous kind, the kind that plans carefully. Robert walked into his private office room and closed the glass doors behind him. Then he picked up his phone and called the only man he still trusted completely, Ethan Brooks, his former personal attorney, retired now, but still one of the sharpest legal minds Robert had ever known. The phone rang twice. "Robert," Ethan answered sleepily. "Do you know what time it is?" "My son may have been drugging Diane." Silence. Complete silence. Then Ethan's voice changed instantly. "What happened?" Robert explained everything carefully. Aspen, the recording, the trust documents, Diane's fear, the isolation. Ethan listened without interrupting once. When Robert finished speaking, Ethan finally sighed heavily. "This isn't family drama anymore," Ethan said quietly. "This is organized manipulation." "I know. You need evidence." Robert looked toward the sleeping figure of Diane through the office glass. "I already have enough to know they destroyed my family." "No," Ethan replied firmly. "You have enough to suspect it. If you want to stop Mark and protect Diane permanently, you need proof that survives in court." Robert closed his eyes briefly. He hated that Ethan was right, because Robert Sterling understood something most people never learn. Truth means nothing without evidence. "I know someone," Ethan continued. "Former intelligence contractor, private cybersecurity specialist now. If your son has hidden anything digitally, this man will find it. Send him." The next morning, snow still covered the streets outside the penthouse when Marcus Hale arrived. Marcus looked ordinary at first glance. Dark jacket, simple clothes, calm expression. But his eyes moved constantly, quietly studying every detail in the room the moment he entered. Robert handed him the old iPad immediately. This recording was hidden inside. Marcus listened carefully through headphones, while Robert and Diane sat nearby in silence. When the recording ended, Marcus placed the tablet on the glass table. "They were careful," he said calmly. Robert frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means people who speak this comfortably about manipulation usually believe they're protected." Diane lowered her eyes immediately. Marcus spent nearly 2 hours examining the device. Most of the time, he said nothing, only typing, watching, listening. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "They installed spyware." Robert's face hardened. "On the iPad?" "On multiple devices connected to the Aspen property network." Diane looked confused. "You mean they were watching me?" Marcus nodded once. "Tracking activity. Messages, contacts, possibly audio access through unsecured devices." Robert's stomach tightened violently. "How long?" "Hard to say." Marcus clicked several more windows across his laptop screen. Then suddenly his expression changed. Slightly. Not shock. Interest. "There's more." Robert stepped closer immediately. Marcus turned the screen toward him. "I found access logs connected to an older Sterling Holdings server." Robert frowned. "That system was retired years ago." "Apparently not." Marcus typed quickly. Again. Encrypted folders appeared across the screen. Most were empty, but one hidden directory remained protected behind multiple layers of security. Marcus bypassed them quietly. Then a file opened. Legacy Blueprint. Phase 3. The air inside. The penthouse suddenly felt colder. Robert stared at the screen while Marcus slowly opened the document. The first page looked clinical, professional, almost corporate. That somehow made it worse. Marcus began reading aloud. Objective: transfer long-term operational authority through psychological dependency and legal restructuring. Diane covered her mouth immediately. Robert remained silent. Marcus continued. Target isolation progress currently estimated at 85%. Robert felt his jaw tighten. Target. Not Diane. Target. Like she was nothing more than a project. Another page appeared. Recommended strategy: reduce outside influence, increase emotional dependency, limit independent communication. Diane's breathing became shaky. Robert moved closer protectively beside her. Then Marcus opened the next section, and suddenly the room went completely silent. Medication adjustments may improve compliance during legal transition periods. Compliance. Not recovery, not care. Compliance. Robert's chest burned. Marcus hesitated briefly before continuing. Future recommendation: assisted living placement following competency review and permanent trust execution. Diane began crying softly. No. Robert looked at her in horror. They were planning to put you into a care facility. Her face turned pale. They kept talking about special treatment centers, she whispered. Mark said I needed more supervision lately. Robert suddenly understood everything. The missing phone, the isolation, the confusion, the emotional pressure. This was never about helping Diane. It was about removing her. Legally, quietly, completely. Marcus scrolled further down the document. Then his voice became even quieter. There's another section. The title appeared on screen. Disciplinary Actions Log. Robert immediately felt sick. Marcus read slowly. November 10th. Target attempted independent banking access. Response: communication restriction for 48 hours. Diane looked down instantly. Robert clenched his fists. Marcus continued. December 3rd. Target resisted trust document discussion. Response: emotional destabilization techniques. Then came the final entry, December 23rd. Target damaged guest property. Response: forced environmental exposure. Robert stared at those words in disbelief. Forced environmental exposure. That was how they described leaving Diane outside in the snow. Like she was an employee being punished. Not a wife, not a mother, not a human being. Diane completely broke down crying. Robert immediately wrapped his arms around her while his own heart felt like it was collapsing under the weight of guilt. Because suddenly, he saw the truth clearly. His wife had not become weak naturally. She had been broken down slowly. And he never noticed, not once. Marcus quietly closed the laptop. They were close, he said carefully. Robert looked up slowly. How close? Marcus hesitated for the first time since arriving. Very close. Silence filled the room. Then Marcus spoke again. If you hadn't removed Diane from Aspen last night, they likely would have executed the final legal transition within days. Diane stared at him in fear. What does that mean? Marcus looked directly at Robert before answering. It means your son was preparing to take permanent control of everything. The drive from Aspen to Denver felt endless. Snow kept crashing against the windshield while the city lights slowly appeared in the distance like ghosts through the storm. Diane sat beside me in silence, wrapped in my heavy coat. Every few minutes, I glanced at her hands. They were still shaking, not just from the cold, from fear. And that fear terrified me more than anything else. Because fear like that doesn't appear overnight. It grows slowly, quietly, like mold behind a wall. You don't notice it until the whole house is poisoned. I tighten my grip on the steering wheel. My name is Robert Sterling. For 40 years, I built skyscrapers, resorts, and luxury developments across America. People called me ruthless in business, sharp, untouchable, but none of those things mattered now. Because somehow, while I was busy building empires, I failed to protect the one person who had protected me my entire life. Diane, the woman who stood beside me when I had nothing but unpaid bills and impossible dreams, and tonight, I found her freezing outside her own son's house. My chest tightened again. I could still see Mark's face standing by that fireplace. Calm. Annoyed. As if his mother being left in the snow was just another inconvenience. That image burned deeper than anger. It felt like grief. When we finally reached Denver, I drove straight into the underground parking garage of my private penthouse building. The security guard recognized my SUV immediately and opened the gates without question. The elevator ride up was silent. Diane leaned weakly against the mirrored wall while I supported her carefully. The moment we entered the penthouse, warm air surrounded us, soft lighting, dark walnut floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Normally, the place felt luxurious. Tonight, it felt empty. I guided Diane toward the guest bedroom. "Sit down," I said softly. She obeyed immediately, too quickly, like someone trained to avoid conflict. That hurt more than anything else. I knelt in front of her and removed her damp shoes carefully. Her socks were soaked from melted snow. Her feet were ice cold. "Jesus," I whispered. Diane looked away. "Rob, please don't make this bigger than it is." I froze, then slowly looked up at her. "Bigger than it is?" Her lips trembled. "Mark's under pressure. Chloe's father has been helping with the company. Things have been stressful." I stared at her in disbelief. Even now, she was defending them. Victims always did that when the abuse lasted long enough. They stopped trusting their own pain. I stood up slowly and walked toward the kitchen. My hands were shaking now too. Not from weakness, from rage. I grabbed a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water. For a moment, I just stood there staring out the giant windows at the snowy Denver skyline. Then I heard soft footsteps behind me. Diane. She wrapped her arms around herself nervously. "Rob," I turned. "What really happened tonight?" Silence. Her eyes lowered immediately. That told me everything. But I waited anyway. Finally, she whispered. "I spilled wine on Chloe's carpet." "That's it?" She said I ruined Christmas. "And Mark?" Diane swallowed hard. "He said I was emotionally unstable." The words hit me like a punch. Emotionally unstable. Not sick, not confused, not elderly. Unstable. Legal language. Prepared language. Carefully chosen words. Suddenly, pieces started clicking together inside my head. Too many pieces. I walked toward her slowly. "Diane, has Mark been handling your finances?" Her hesitation lasted barely 2 seconds, but it was enough. "Yes." "How much?" "I don't know exactly." I closed my eyes briefly. That answer alone was a disaster. Diane had always managed charitable projects and personal accounts herself. She was meticulous, organized. For her not to know, someone had taken control away from her. "How long?" "About a year." "A year?" She nodded weakly. Mark said you were too busy overseas and that it would help reduce stress for me. I felt sick. For the past year, I'd been traveling constantly between London, Dubai, and Singapore, negotiating international projects. Mark had positioned himself perfectly, not just inside the company, inside our lives, inside our marriage. And I never noticed, because I trusted him. God help me. I trusted my own son. Diane suddenly looked terrified. Please don't confront him tonight. Too late. I already had. But now I realized something worse. Tonight wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't just cruelty. It was part of something larger, carefully managed, controlled, planned. I walked back into the bedroom. Where's your phone? She blinked nervously. Mark has it. My entire body went still. What? He said there were security risks, people trying to manipulate me. I stared at her. They took your phone. He said it was temporary. When? A few months ago. My stomach twisted. Isolation. Classic isolation. Cutting communication. Controlling access. Monitoring movement. This wasn't family tension anymore. This was systematic. Calculated. Dangerous. Diane suddenly pointed toward the bed. My iPad is there. I looked. Down. An old silver iPad rested beside the pillow. I use it sometimes for music, she said quietly. Mark doesn't know I still have it. That sentence alone chilled me, like she was hiding contraband from her own family. I picked up the device carefully and powered it on. Battery at 14%. No messages, no email, no social media, almost wiped clean. Then I noticed a small voice recording application. Old, unused, or so I thought. One recent file sat near the top. Title, Living Room Rug Ideas. Saved 3 days ago. My thumb hovered over the screen. Something inside me already knew this was bad. Very bad. I pressed play. At first, only muffled movement. A door opening. Softly. Then Chloe's voice. Clear. Cold. Sweet in the way poison tastes sweet. We need to speed this up. My blood froze instantly. Another voice answered. Mark. Mom's becoming difficult. Chloe sighed. She keeps trying to contact old friends. Then silence, a drawer opening, glass clinking, and then words that shattered whatever remained of my trust forever. Did you change the dosage? I felt my heartbeat stop. Mark answered calmly. Only slightly. It makes her more confused. More dependent. Diane gasped softly beside me, but the recording continued. Chloe laughed quietly. Good. We only need 3 more days before the trust documents are finalized. Then Mark again. Dad's too distracted overseas to notice anything. A pause, then the final knife. Once the permanent trust transfers, Sterling Holdings belongs to us. The recording ended. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Suffocating. Diane looked horrified, not just because of what they said, but because hearing it aloud finally destroyed the lies she had been clinging to. I slowly lowered the iPad. My hands no longer trembled. The rage was gone now. Something colder replaced it. Clarity. Pure clarity. Because betrayal hurts most when it comes from someone you raised. I remembered teaching Mark how to ride a bicycle, holding his tiny shoulders steady. I remembered his graduation speech at Harvard, the pride I felt, the tears in Diane's eyes. I remembered handing him his first executive position at Sterling Holdings. I thought I was building a legacy. Instead, I was handing weapons to a predator. Diane suddenly began crying quietly. I didn't know, she whispered. Rob, I swear I didn't know. I immediately sat beside her. I know. No, I should have seen it. You trusted your son. So did you. Her tears broke something inside me. Because she wasn't crying over money or power, she was mourning her child, the same way I was. Only neither of us wanted to admit it yet. I stood slowly. There's more. Diane looked up. What? I stared toward the city lights outside the windows. People like Mark don't move carefully unless lawyers are involved. Her face went pale instantly. Chloe's father, yes. Attorney Gerald Vance, one of the most aggressive corporate lawyers in Colorado, a man who treated legal warfare like sport. Suddenly his silence back at the mansion made sense. He wasn't surprised, because this entire situation had probably been his design. And if that was true, then Mark and Chloe were already several steps ahead. That meant one thing. I couldn't react emotionally. I had to think strategically. I walked into my office. Dark wood shelves lined the walls. Awards, photos, contracts. 40 years of power sitting quietly in frames and leather binders. I picked up my private phone. Only a handful of people had this number. One of them was Ethan Cole, my oldest attorney. Retired, brilliant, loyal, the only man I still trusted completely. The phone rang twice. Then his sleepy voice answered. Robert? Ethan. I need help. He immediately became alert. What happened? I looked toward the bedroom where Diane sat silently clutching the blanket around herself. Then, I answered, my son just declared war on my family. Silence. Then Ethan spoke quietly. How bad is it? I glanced at the iPad. Bad enough that I need someone who understands cybersecurity, financial tracing, and corporate sabotage. Another pause. Then Ethan said something that sent chills through me. You think they've already moved assets. They admitted it on recording. What else? They manipulated Diane medically. Silence again. Longer this time. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. Cold, professional, dangerous. I'll make some calls. Tonight. Understood. I ended the call and leaned against the desk heavily. For the first time in decades, I felt tired. Not physically, spiritually. There's a particular pain that comes when you realize success blinded you. I spent my entire life believing I was protecting my family by building wealth. But wealth without attention creates emptiness, and emptiness attracts monsters. Around 2 a.m, Diane finally fell asleep. I sat alone in the dark living room with a glass of untouched whiskey beside me. Snow drifted quietly beyond the windows. Denver looked peaceful, but inside my head, memories kept replaying. Mark at age 10, asking if he could sit in my office chair. Mark at 16 begging me to teach him negotiations. Mark at 25 promising he'd protect the company after I retired. All lies. Or maybe not lies at first. Maybe greed changed him slowly. That thought hurt even more, because it meant I watched my son become someone terrible and never noticed. At exactly 7:15 the next morning, the penthouse intercom buzzed. I answered immediately. Mr. Sterling, security said. You have a visitor. Name? Marcus Hale. Right on time. I opened the door myself a few minutes later. Marcus looked nothing like the cybersecurity experts I'd met before. No expensive suit, no flashy confidence, just a dark coat, tired eyes, and the calm posture of someone who spent years in dangerous situations. He stepped inside quietly. You're Robert Sterling. Yes. He nodded once. Ethan briefed me. Marcus noticed Diane sleeping on the sofa nearby and lowered his voice immediately. Tell me everything. So I did. Every detail. The snow, the recordings, the missing phone, the trust, the medication. Marcus listened without interrupting, once. When I finished, he held out his hand. The iPad. I gave it to him. For nearly 2 hours, he worked silently at the dining table while snowlight filled the room. Finally, he looked up. They've been monitoring her. My jaw tightened. How? Custom spyware linked directly to the Aspen property network. Diane looked horrified. They listened to me. Marcus nodded. Probably tracked. Conversations, searches, device activity, maybe more. I felt sick again. Marcus continued typing, then suddenly stopped. His expression changed slightly. What is it? They made a mistake. What kind? The dangerous kind. He turned the laptop screen toward me. A hidden folder appeared. Encrypted. Recently accessed. Marcus spoke quietly. Your son kept archived planning documents on an older disconnected server. Can you open them? I already did. Then he clicked the file. Title: Legacy Blueprint, Phase 3. The room suddenly felt colder than the Aspen snowstorm, and deep inside me, something finally broke completely. Marcus opened the file slowly. The glow from the laptop screen reflected across his face, while silence filled the penthouse. I moved closer. Diane sat frozen on the sofa behind me, clutching the blanket tightly around her shoulders. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Marcus inhaled quietly. You should prepare yourself before reading this. I looked at him. I buried my father at 19. I built my first company while creditors threatened lawsuits every week. I survived corporate wars, investigations, and betrayals worth billions. My voice hardened. There's nothing left that can shock me. Marcus didn't argue. He simply turned the screen fully toward me, and then I saw it. Legacy Blueprint Strategic Family Transition Plan. Below the title sat dozens of pages, charts, timelines, medical notes, financial projections, behavioral, observations. Everything neat, organized, professional. Like my wife's suffering had become a business project. I felt my stomach twist. Marcus scrolled carefully. Page 12, he said quietly. I read the first line. Phase 2. Objective: reduce target independence through emotional destabilization and controlled dependency. I stopped breathing for a second. Target. Not Diane. Not Mom. Target. My wife had become a target. Marcus kept reading aloud. Limit communication with external emotional support systems. Reduce independent transportation access. Encourage confusion regarding finances and medication schedules. Diane covered her mouth with trembling hands. Oh my God. I kept staring at the screen. There were progress percentages beside every objective. Isolation effectiveness, 85%. Financial dependency, 92%. Resistance reduction, ongoing. It looked like a corporate merger report. Only the company being dismantled was my family. Marcus scrolled farther. Another section appeared. Disciplinary responses. My entire body went cold. What is that? Diane whispered. Marcus hesitated, then read quietly. November 10th. Subject attempted unauthorized bank inquiry. Response: Internet access temporarily restricted for 48 hours. Diane gasped softly. I looked back at her immediately. They locked. You inside? Her eyes filled with shame. I thought, maybe I deserved it. Those words shattered something inside me. Nobody deserves that. Nobody. Especially not the woman who spent 35 years loving her family. Marcus continued. December 23rd. Subject disrupted holiday environment by damaging guest property. I clenched my jaw. Then came the next line. Corrective action. Controlled environmental exposure to reduce resistance. Controlled environmental exposure. That was how Attorney Vance described throwing Diane into the snow. Not cruelty, not abuse. A tactic. A calculated tactic. I turned, away from the screen, and walked toward the windows. Denver stretched endlessly below. Cold, silent, beautiful. And suddenly I hated every luxury tower I had ever built. Because while I chased power, evil quietly entered my home wearing designer clothes and legal language. Behind me, Marcus spoke carefully. There's more. I didn't turn around. Say it. The final phase involved transferring Mrs. Sterling into a specialized medical care facility. Diane froze. What? Marcus looked uncomfortable for the first time. Legal documentation was already drafted declaring you mentally unstable and incapable of independent financial decisions. The room spun slightly. I placed one hand against the glass window. How close were they? Marcus answered immediately. Very close. Diane started crying silently, not loudly, not dramatically, just small broken sounds from someone realizing their entire reality had been manipulated. I walked back toward her slowly and sat beside her. She looked at me like a frightened child. Rob, they were going to lock me away? I took her trembling hands carefully. No. Her tears fell harder. Why would Mark do this? That question hurt more than anything else, because I didn't have an answer. Greed? Power? Influence? From Chloe? Maybe all of it. But no explanation could justify what he became. Marcus closed the laptop quietly. They believed you were too isolated to fight back. I stared at the dark screen. They underestimated me. No, Marcus said carefully. They underestimated how much you still love your wife. Silence settled over the room again. Then suddenly, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I answered, immediately. Robert Sterling. A familiar voice replied smoothly. Good morning, Robert. Attorney Gerald Vance. Of course. I walked farther into the office area while Marcus watched carefully. What do you want? Vance chuckled softly. You removed Diane quite dramatically last night. You left my wife freezing outside. A misunderstanding. No, I said coldly. A strategy. Silence. Tiny, barely noticeable. But I heard it. Then Vance's voice returned smoother than before. You seem emotional. And you seem nervous. That made him pause longer. Interesting. Very interesting. Because men like Gerald Vance only hesitated when they sensed danger. I think we should discuss this privately, he said. There's nothing to discuss. Robert, these situations can become unpleasant. I smiled without humor. They already are. Another pause. Then his tone shifted colder. You should think carefully before making impulsive accusations. Your health and emotional condition after last night may raise concerns. There it was. The strategy. Question my mental stability before I could expose them. I almost admired the precision. Almost. Instead, I answered quietly. You made one mistake, Gerald. And what's that? You thought I was weak because I trusted people. Silence. I built Sterling Holdings from nothing, I continued. Do you know how many predators I destroyed to protect that company? He said nothing. My son may have forgotten who I am. Then I ended the call. When I returned to the living room, Marcus already looked concerned. He's preparing legal containment. I know. We need to move quickly. I nodded slowly, then my eyes drifted toward the wall of windows again. For years, I believed revenge meant anger, aggression, destruction. But true revenge? True revenge is calm, precise, patient, and irreversible. I turned back toward Marcus. How much access do they still have to company systems? Marcus sat down again. Some, but your son got overconfident. Meaning? He centralized. Too much authority under himself. I narrowed my eyes. That sounds unlike him. It's not confidence, Marcus said. It's greed. Then he looked directly at me. And greed makes smart people sloppy. For the first time since Aspen, I felt something dangerous rising inside me. Not rage, purpose. Marcus opened another file. These transfers here, he said, pointing at the screen. 3.5 million moved through consulting shells connected to Vance. Diane looked shocked. $3.5 million? A small amount compared to your total holdings, Marcus said, carefully. but enough to establish a pattern. I crossed my arms. Can you trace all of it? Yes. How long? Marcus thought briefly. 24 hours for preliminary mapping, longer for complete exposure. Do it. Diane suddenly looked worried. Rob, what are you planning? I looked at her quietly. The truth. But Mark is still our son. The pain in her voice nearly weakened me. Nearly. But then I remembered her sitting in the snow, alone, terrified. And whatever softness remained inside me hardened again. Our son disappeared a long time ago, I said quietly. Diane looked away, crying. That broke my heart too, because even after everything, a mother still mourns. Hours passed. Marcus worked non-stop tracing accounts, archived emails, and hidden communications. What he uncovered became worse with every hour. Fake consulting contracts, manipulated medical consultations, private discussions about accelerating Diane's dependency, and worst of all, plans to remove me entirely from executive authority within Sterling Holdings. Not eventually, soon, very soon. At one point, Marcus leaned back heavily. They intended to trigger a corporate emergency vote. I looked up immediately. When? Probably within days. That explained everything. The snow incident, the pressure, the medication. They were rushing because they sensed control slipping. I sat quietly for a long moment, then finally asked, if they succeeded, what would have happened? Marcus answered bluntly. You would have been isolated from company operations using health concerns. And Diane? His silence answered first, then quietly. She would have disappeared into supervised care. Diane broke down completely after hearing that. I wrapped my arms around her while she cried against my chest. And suddenly I remembered something from years ago. Mark at age 7, terrified during a thunderstorm. He climbed into our bed shaking, and Diane held him all night whispering, "You're safe, sweetheart. Mom's here." That same woman, that same loving mother, was almost imprisoned by the child she protected. I closed my eyes, and in that moment, the last piece of my hesitation died. By evening, Marcus finally closed the laptop. I have enough. I looked at him carefully. For what? To destroy them. The room went silent. Diane looked frightened by the word. Destroy. But Marcus didn't mean violence. He meant exposure, truth, evidence, consequences. The kind powerful people fear most. I stood slowly. No police yet. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You sure? Yes. Why? Because police investigations move slowly. Lawyers manipulate narratives, evidence disappears, and powerful families bury scandals every day. But corporate boards, investors, media exposure? Those things move fast, very fast. I looked toward the skyline again, then finally said the words that changed everything. We hit them publicly. Diane stared at me. Rob. They planned this like a business operation. I turned back toward her. So I'll end it like one. Marcus nodded slowly. You're thinking board intervention? Yes. And your son? I felt something inside me harden. Completely. Mark wanted control of Sterling Holdings. I picked up my phone. Tomorrow morning, I looked at both of them. I'm taking everything away from him. Barely slept that night. Not because I was afraid, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw Diane sitting alone in the snow. That image had become permanent, burned into my mind like a scar. Around 5 in the morning, I stood alone in the penthouse kitchen staring at the Denver skyline while coffee cooled untouched beside me. For years, I believed power solved problems, money, influence, control. But none of it mattered if the people closest to you lost their humanity. And somehow, my own son had become a stranger. Behind me, soft footsteps approached. Diane. She wore one of my sweaters now, sleeves covering part of her hands. For the first time in days, she looked calmer, not healed, but stronger. She stepped beside me quietly. "You're really going through with this?" I nodded once. "If I don't stop Mark now, he'll destroy everything." Diane lowered her eyes sadly. "He used to be such a kind boy." That sentence hurt more than any betrayal, because she was right. Mark wasn't born cruel. I remembered birthday parties, camping trips, baseball games. I remembered him crying after accidentally hitting a bird with his bicycle when he was 9. That boy had empathy once. Somewhere along the way, ambition hollowed him out. Or maybe I did. Maybe I taught him success mattered more than people. The thought made me sick. Diane touched my arm gently. "Promise me something." "What?" "When this is over, don't become like them." I looked at her carefully. Even after everything, she still worried about my soul. That was Diane, always protecting hearts while others chased power. "I promise," I whispered. At exactly 9:30 in the morning, Marcus finished preparing the evidence package: financial transfers, audio recordings, archived communications, medical manipulation notes, the legacy blueprint. Every piece organized perfectly. Enough to destroy careers, enough to trigger investigations, enough to collapse reputations forever. Marcus handed me a secure tablet. "The board meeting starts in 30 minutes. I nodded slowly, then looked toward the bedroom mirror nearby. For a long moment, I barely recognized myself. Older, tired, harder. But something else too. Awake. For years, I operated on trust. Today, I operated on truth. At 9:55, the virtual boardroom opened. Faces began appearing one by one across the massive conference screen inside the penthouse office. Men and women I had worked beside for decades, investors, executives, partners. Every one of them looked confused about the emergency holiday meeting. Then Mark appeared. Perfect suit, perfect posture, perfect corporate smile. But I noticed something immediately. He looked nervous. Good. He should have been. "Dad," he said smoothly, "I'm glad you agreed to discuss this professionally." Professionally. Interesting choice of words after leaving his mother outside in a snowstorm. I sat calmly at the head of the table. Diane sat beside me quietly. The moment Mark saw her, his expression shifted slightly. Not guilt. Calculation. He was already trying to predict what she remembered, what she might say, what evidence we had. That fear gave me confidence. The board chairman cleared his throat. "Robert, you requested this emergency session. Is everything all right?" I looked directly into the camera. "No." Silence immediately filled the meeting. Mark straightened slightly. Then he began speaking before I could continue. "Before we proceed," he interrupted smoothly, "I believe the board should know my father has been under extreme emotional distress following a family incident last night." I almost smiled. "Predictable. Very predictable," Mark continued, calmly. "He removed my mother from medical supervision against professional recommendations and has shown signs of emotional instability." Several board members exchanged uncomfortable looks. There it was. The narrative. Paint me unstable before I exposed him. Classic corporate defense strategy. But Mark made one mistake. He underestimated preparation. I leaned forward calmly. "Are you finished?" Mark hesitated slightly. "Yes." I pressed one button on the tablet. Marcus immediately activated the presentation remotely. The screen changed. Legacy Blueprint, Phase 3. Every face on the board stiffened. Mark went pale instantly. Good, now he understood. I spoke quietly. "For the past year, my wife Diane Sterling has been systematically manipulated psychologically, financially, and medically." Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. "Those responsible include my son Mark Sterling." I paused deliberately. in attorney Gerald Vance. Shock spread visibly across the screens. Mark immediately shook his head. That's ridiculous. I ignored him. Then I played the recording. Chloe's voice filled the boardroom speakers. We need to speed this up. Then Mark's voice. Adjusting the dosage makes her more dependent. Dead silence. Absolute silence. One board member removed his glasses slowly. Another muttered, "My God." Mark looked horrified now, not remorseful, cornered. There's context missing. I muted his microphone. Exactly the way he once muted junior executives during negotiations. The irony almost felt poetic. I looked calmly into the camera again. This is not emotional retaliation, I said. This is evidence. Marcus changed slides. Financial? Transfers appeared. Shell consulting companies, management fees, hidden authorizations, millions quietly moved through Vance-connected accounts. I continued steadily. My son abused executive authority, misused company resources, manipulated medical information regarding my wife, and attempted hostile control over Sterling Holdings. Mark pounded his desk silently on screen. Muted. Powerless. Exactly where he belonged. One board member finally spoke. Robert, are these documents verified? Yes. Another voice asked quietly. Is there more? I looked down briefly, then answered, there's enough to trigger criminal investigations. That sentence changed everything. You could feel the room shift instantly. Corporate loyalty vanished. Self-preservation took over. That's how boardrooms work. Not emotion, risk. And Mark had become risk. For the first time in his life, my son realized money couldn't protect him anymore. I unmuted him. Immediately, he exploded. You can't do this. His polished image shattered completely. This company is mine. I built... No, I interrupted calmly. You inherited opportunity. You confuse that with earning it. His face twisted with rage. You're destroying your own family. The words echoed heavily, because part of me knew he believed them. People like Mark always think consequences are betrayal. I stared at him quietly, then answered with the hardest truth I had ever spoken. No, Mark. My voice stayed calm. You destroyed this family the moment your mother became a target instead of a human being. Silence. Even Mark stopped speaking. Diane quietly reached for my hand beneath the table. Her fingers trembled slightly. But this time, not from fear. The chairman spoke carefully. Robert, what action are you requesting from the board? I stood slowly. Every screen focused on me. For 40 years, these people had watched me build Sterling Holdings into a global empire. Today, they would watch me dismantle it. I am formally removing Mark Sterling from all executive authority, effective immediately. Mark shouted again. I ignored him. And second, I paused. Not for drama, for grief. Because this next decision cost me more than anyone in that room understood. I am dissolving Sterling Holdings entirely. The board erupted instantly. Confusion, shock, disbelief. Mark looked like he stopped breathing. I continued anyway. All assets will transfer into a private charitable structure, named the Sterling Compassion Foundation. Silence crashed down again. I looked at Diane. Tears filled her eyes. Not because of the money, because she finally understood. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was redemption. I faced the board again. The foundation will focus on elder protection, abuse recovery, mental health support, and safe housing initiatives. One board member whispered softly, $5 billion. Yes, I answered. Every dollar my son tried to steal will now protect people like the woman he tried to destroy. Mark looked completely shattered now. Years of ambition, collapsing in real time. This is insane, he whispered. I almost pitied him. Almost. Then I remembered the snow. I remembered Diane crying because she thought she deserved punishment. And whatever pity remained disappeared. The chairman finally nodded slowly. Understood. That was it. 40 years of empire reduced to one word. Understood. I ended the meeting immediately. The screens vanished. Silence returned to the penthouse. Heavy. Permanent. Diane looked at me quietly. It's over. I nodded slowly, but it didn't feel victorious. It felt sad, like attending the funeral of a future that never happened. A few days later, the media storm exploded exactly as Marcus predicted. Investigations began. Lawsuits followed. Attorney Vance tried fighting back publicly, claiming fabricated evidence and emotional instability. But the recordings destroyed him. The legacy blueprint destroyed him, and most importantly, his own arrogance destroyed him. People believed documents. People believed audio. People believed patterns. Soon, Mark disappeared from public view completely. Corporate friends abandoned him. Social circles vanished. The same elite world he worshipped turned its back on him overnight. That's the truth about power. It only loves you while you're useful. 2 weeks later, Diane and I left Denver permanently. We sold almost everything. The Aspen mansion, the Miami estate, the yacht, the private club memberships, all gone. The money transferred directly into the foundation. People called me crazy, emotionally broken, self-destructive. Maybe they were partly right. But for the first time in decades, I felt free. We bought a smaller home deep in the Colorado mountains. Nothing extravagant. Just a quiet log house surrounded by pine trees and snow. No marble halls, no private chefs, no giant boardrooms. Just peace. Real peace. The first night there, Diane stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket watching snowfall drift through the mountains. Then she smiled softly. I can breathe again. 3 months later, something remarkable happened. Diane changed. The fear slowly disappeared from her eyes. Her laugh returned. Her confidence returned. Even her posture changed, like someone stepping out of darkness into sunlight. One afternoon, she entered my study carrying design sketches. The foundation needs a recovery center, she said. I smiled softly. And you already designed it? She grinned for the first time in months. Large windows, warm lighting, community gardens, no locked exterior doors anywhere, safe spaces, human spaces, places where vulnerable people could feel dignity again. Diane dedicated herself completely to that mission, and watching her heal became the greatest gift of my life. One snowy evening nearly a year later, we sat quietly beside the fireplace in our small mountain home. Nothing fancy, just hot chocolate, soft music, snow falling outside. Diane rested against my shoulder while reading. I looked at her warm hands, resting peacefully in mine. Then quietly whispered, "You're not cold anymore." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "No," she said softly. "I'm finally home." And in that moment, I understood something important. Success without love is emptiness. Power without compassion becomes poison. And sometimes losing everything false is the only way to find what truly matters. I lost $1 billion empire. But I saved my wife. I lost my son. But I found my conscience again. And maybe that was the real fortune all along. Because in the end, the warmest homes are not built from stone, glass, or money. They are built from loyalty, truth, and the people who would never leave you freezing in the snow.